parents that have been taking responsibility for that have been women. That women are trying to also work from home as well as parent from home. You know, it's this kind of idea of multitasking gone a little bit mad. And so I think we all often will say, I'm so busy, I'm so tired, I'm so stressed, I really just kind of need a rest, or I need everything to stop. But it's actually very difficult for us to do that for ourselves. And I think even going into lockdown, even for those of us that don't have children or whose lives actually did slow down and did become a lot quieter, it doesn't necessarily mean that we're resting, because if our mind is still switched on, and if our mind is still highly stressed, which means that the body is also stressed, because of course in the context of yoga there's a mind-body connection, you can't separate the two. If one's stressed, the other's stressed, then actually having nothing to do isn't restful. So this is where the practice of restorative yoga and yoga nidra come in really useful. They actually work with our bodies and work with our minds so that we can find that state of rest in the moment. It doesn't have to be, oh, I need, as lovely as it would be, you know, a 5-star 2-week yoga retreat, you know, I'm sure we would all love that, but it's not possible. Certainly at the moment it's not possible. No. So it's like going, well, okay, well, if I can't get 2 weeks holiday away from my life, then what can I do? And it's about coming back to the moment. And you know, even just 10 minutes of what I call radical rest, which is different than, say, just lying on the sofa and watching Netflix, can actually bring such a feeling of restoration. So it's you know, it's this sense of reclaiming our time and actually becoming more conscious about what we're doing, so that if we do have 5 or 10 minutes, we're not just kind of scrolling aimlessly on our phones, but we all do it, and the technology is designed for us to do it. It's something that we're all battling. But the more we can practice, or maybe I'll just take this posture in this book, or even just lie with my feet up and an eye pillow over my eyes, we actually start to be more proactive about making that choice to come back to ourselves.
So 10 minutes of radical rest, I like that. In fact, you know, eye pillows have become my gift of choice to send to people who I know were under pressure, because actually when you lie down, I think there's a vagus nerve connection as well, isn't there, when you put that light pressure on your eyes? But it also means that you're blocking out the light, and you have to lie back or it'll fall off.
And it's so that basically the eye pillows are reducing stimulation, and it's the opposite of what most of modern life is. Most of modern life is highly stimulated, whether that's through things like caffeine and sugar, or it's through things like being on screens all of the time and being on our phones, or just doing endless to-do list. We're constantly stimulating ourselves, so we're keeping our nervous system in a very overactive state. And of course this then can lead to all sorts of different health problems, insomnia being, you know, a classic one, as well as problems for the hormonal system. And then of course it's very easy to get into that vicious cycle where you really need to sleep and you can't sleep. And again, this is why I think that the reframing rest is an actual practice. It's not about not doing anything, you know, because if you're full of stress hormones, sitting or lying around isn't going to make you feel any better. But if you can do something that consciously reduces that feeling of stress in your body, then you're relaxing. You know, even with a basic, you know, bits of equipment, like say an eye pillow, which you can make yourself, you don't even have to buy anything, and just 5 or 10 minutes, you know, even if it's just before you go to bed, actually that's a great time, but just before you go to bed, but just something you can kind of reclaim your right to rest.
I really like that idea of reclaiming, of actually, you think when you look at young children, they know when they're tired. I mean, sometimes they will get overtired, but generally that's quite often with the stimulation of with excess stimulation of whether that's sugar or telly or like too many people in a room. But actually they kind of know, and when you allow them the space, and that's what these lockdowns in the last year have done, have allowed the children the space, my children the space, to know when it is that they need to rest. but the attraction of the screens, that's the battle, isn't it? Always the battle with actually battle feels like a really negative word, but I know for me, I know that if I've got 5 minutes, I will sit and scroll on my phone, but actually it's not going to give me what I need. Which is where I mean, legs up the wall is one of my favorite yoga poses, because it's so simple and easy, and because I'm a runner as well, that length in the back of my legs really always really helpful. But reclaiming it can be really hard, and I think the message that's would be really good to get across this evening is that it doesn't have to take long, but it has to be a conscious decision to rest, and to notice that there's kind of there'll be this little voice in your head that says, oh well, I could just sit down and watch Netflix, that's relaxing, or I could just scroll. And there'll also be a little voice in your head that says that you don't deserve to rest, or that you're too busy to rest, you've got too much to do. But actually to reclaim the idea of rest as being part of how you nourish yourself, I suppose, for well-being.
Yeah, and I think this is where the yoga component really comes in, and this, the awareness really, and the mindfulness that comes into it. Because one thing that does happen when we do give ourselves permission to rest, so like, as you say, the posture where you lie on your back with your legs up against the wall, which is so wonderful for reducing fatigue. And if you're ever in that wired, tired state, then legs up against the wall is kind of perfect thing to do. If you've had a day where you've been on a screen all day, then that's a great transition from the day to the evening. But what does start to happen, particularly if we're used to being very busy and very on the go, which was totally me for like all of my 20s, it is the decade you can probably get away with it, is that when you do finally stop, this can get really loud. Your mind can really start to talk at you. And so, yes, you do get all of those voices that say, oh, I should really be doing the washing up, or I probably should have checked that email. Oh, I don't know if I've locked the back door. That voice that keeps chatting away at you. And of course, the critical voice as well, which is like, you don't have time for this. You've got all these other things to do. It's the practice of yoga is about learning to recognize that voice but detach from it, so that over time we start to realize that voice isn't necessarily telling us the truth. It's just a voice. It's just a voice in our head that has been built up over years from our conditioning, from our culture, because we live in a culture that doesn't value rest. It values this idea of being busy. We see that as a sign of success. We see it as productivity, even though often it's very unproductive to be busy all the time. And we live in a culture which doesn't really value sleep and doesn't really value napping, let alone anything that we might consider, deep relaxation.
Napping is now one of my favorite things.
And I think it's it's not for everyone, but it's wonderful if you can do it and it works for you. Then it's it's really, really restorative, particularly for whatever reason you're not sleeping well at night. Maybe you've got young children, or you work shifts, or you're just not sleeping well at night. Then actually grabbing those little chunks of time, as you said, it can sometimes just be 10 minutes, can make such a big difference. But we do have to learn to recognize why we keep ourselves so busy. And I think this experience of these various lockdowns that we've been in, me certainly, was a real opportunity to reflect and evaluate my own lifestyle, which I had, before lockdown, I considered that I'd made a lot of very radical changes to my own life. But when we went into the first lockdown, I had a few months really, because my work, like many of us, kind of got completely wiped. And I realised I'm still actually rushing around quite a lot. I'm still actually quite busy. I'm still keeping myself on the go. And I could say, well, it's I really love my work, and I think my work's valuable, and of course money is always helpful. But actually, coming back to a point you made earlier, sometimes I'm still driving around to get to these engagements. And then, you know, I live in Bristol where there's, you know, many a tempting coffee shop. So I'm spending the money I'm earning, and certainly spending a lot of time. And going into that first lockdown for me just deepened my experience of rest, because I was like, there's actually nothing to do. I can't plan anything because I don't know when I'm going to be able to hold anything face to face again. And I can't, you know, do anything at this moment apart from a bit of online teaching. And it was another opportunity for me to reflect on that voice in my own mind that keeps me busy. And I think it ultimately can come down to never feeling good enough. We never quite feel good enough. So it's like, well, if I just do an extra course, or if I just do an extra class, or if I just do more and more, then somehow I'm a better person. And ultimately, my book is about saying, no, you're actually enough as you are. Even if you're exhausted and numb and disconnected, you're actually enough in this moment. And when you start to explore that through the practice of rest, by saying, actually, I'm going to make a choice to ignore the washing up and do something that's going to really nourish my mind and my body and soul. When you make that sort of decision, as small as it can be, you're acknowledging your own value and your own self-worth. And that, though it seems like a tiny thing for a lot of women, especially, who, you know, again, we have a culture that tells us constantly we're not good enough. You know, it is radical. It can be really life-changing. And you know, 5-10 minutes is all you need.
Yeah, I think that's really powerful, actually, really powerful. I'm going to hold that, I think. So I have, at the moment, I have 2 reminders that pop up on my phone every day to kind of just, it's ridiculous to have a reminder, but to check in and see if I need to rest, because I was getting to a point, because I've got things that are going on outside of family, lockdown and work. I'm like, I know that there's a real risk of kind of overload, overwhelm, overtired, and so now that's part of my practice. I actually just check in twice a day. How do I feel, and is there something that I need to do for me? And I'm resisting it as well, so it's like a little bit of a battle, but that's my experiment at the moment.
Well, I think that sounds a great tactic, Leslie, and I would recommend, you know, your listeners here to consider doing something like that. And I myself, certainly in my early days of exploring how to rest, you know, I used to have this diary that was completely crammed with all this stuff I was trying to do, and I used to start scheduling in rest. So I used to just, you know, try and block out, you know, a morning or an afternoon, or, you know, wherever it was, and just write rest in such big letters I couldn't fit anything in. So it would stop me. Ideally, it would stop me. And I remember someone laughing and going, God, that's so rigid. And I was like, but it's the only way I will do it, you know. And now, you know, I'm at a point now I don't really feel I need to do that so much, but certainly I am conscious, because this isn't about having nothing to do, you know. I want to be really clear about that, because if it was about doing nothing, then only the very wealthy could do it, because most of us have jobs, and some of us have families, and we have commitments, you know, in our lives, and we have hobbies and projects that we're passionate about. This isn't about just, you know, like I say, it's not about just lying on the sofa not doing anything, but it actually is about a deeper level of self-inquiry. So we actually start to go, why am I doing that? Why am I keeping myself so busy? Why am I scrolling down my phone? You know, actually, if I pay attention, I think I feel a bit anxious and I'm trying to distract myself, you know, whatever it might be. It's actually about, you know, recognizing we are making tiny choices. They are tiny choices, but they're the most powerful choices. The choices we make every day create our whole life. So again, it's like, you know, stepping back. It's like constant, like just stepping back and going, okay, like you said, okay, how am I feeling? You know, because sometimes in restorative yoga, you know, I've got students that have been practicing with me for years, and they will say, yes, sometimes I'll do a class and my mind's just busy the whole time, and I think, you know, it's not working. But then when it gets to the end of the class, I feel better. And then sometimes I say, oh, as soon as I got into that first posture, that was it, you know, I could have stayed there all night. So it's not about it just being like one method that fixes all, but it's about just a set of tools that that we use to learn more about ourselves. And it's incredibly empowering. And I think it becomes even more empowering, again, when we look at the cultural pressures on women to kind of do things like yoga, to, you know, have a yoga body, whatever that means, or, you know, to lose weight, or to have these glamorous leggings, or whatever it might be, you know, which is, none of those things have anything to do with yoga. But actually it becomes quite radical to go, no, I'm actually going to do something which is really relaxing and really nourishing, that I actually really enjoy, you know, that I feel really good for. You know, again, that can be very powerful.
Yeah. And I just love this idea. I love what you just said just then about a set of tools that we use to learn more about ourselves, and also to understand that those tools aren't always, that it needs to be a variety of tools, because it's not always the same thing that will work. So one day, legs up the wall and an eye pillow is all you need to kind of switch off. But another day it might be that actually that you need to go out and go for a walk in nature, so that you're kind of gradually letting go of some of that cortisol, letting go of some of that, reconnecting to back into your body again, so that you can allow your mind to flow. And that, so, and I always, but it's an experiment. I feel like I've got a set of tools that's constantly evolving as well. So that's always, you know, that so my latest thing is, so I used to, like you, I used to have times blocked off in my diary, because I could see that by Thursday afternoon I would often be, because I teach early in the morning and do some evenings, by Thursday afternoon often I would be a bit too tired. So I started to block off Thursday afternoon and Friday afternoons. But then that doesn't apply at the moment, because life has changed. And so, and it's, so the experiment is in finding these tiny little check-ins during the day at the moment, so that keeps me on top of things. But those check-ins change. So, and my other thing is that if I pick up my phone and I'm scrolling, to just as you said, to ask myself, what am I doing? Why am I doing this? You know, I picked it up because I thought of something's popped into my head, but as soon as I picked it up, I've been distracted by something else.
Yeah.
By a little pattern. But asking ourselves those questions aren't always very easy, but they can be quite illuminating.
Exactly. And that's why, you know, so in my book, as well as having so the tools that I work with are the restorative yoga and yoga nidra. And yoga nidra, in case anyone's wondering what on earth that means, it's a form of meditation, but it's done through deep relaxation. So you lie down and you basically drift into a very sleep-like state. And that's, in a nutshell, that's what it is. But I also include, as well as those techniques, is principles, you know, the principles of radical rest. And one of those, maybe the most important one, is compassion, you know, because it's not easy to change our habits. You know, it's not easy when we're living through very anxious, stressful times to actually sit with ourselves, because sometimes you'll sit with yourself and think, I feel awful. You know, I'm noticing that I'm very tense, or I'm noticing that my mind is whirling, you know. So this isn't about kind of punishing ourselves or judging ourselves or any way, but recognizing that often we're so scared of feeling uncomfortable that we'd rather do anything else, you know, any household chore, than just actually just be a bit uncomfortable. But what yoga has to teach us is that actually, if you can just see how it is just to sit with that feeling a little bit. And, you know, restorative yoga is effective because the postures are really comfortable. There's no stretching, there's no muscular effort. It's about complete softening. When you can soften your body, you start to relax your mind. So actually it's easier than you think to just have that quality of self-inquiry, so that when you're in the postures, they're designed to relax you. So if you're the sort of person that thinks, I can't sit still for 5 minutes, let alone, you know, do a whole restorative yoga class, well, even if you just did a restorative yoga posture, one posture for 10 minutes, it would be completely different than just sitting in a chair for 10 minutes. You know, because they are designed to activate your parasympathetic nervous system, so to take you out of that fight or flight high stress mode and into a relaxed state. So it actually, the hardest thing always is, you know, just deciding to do it. Once you decide to do something, it's, you know, like, you'll know with things like running, often it's the thought of running that you think, oh, but once you actually put your trainers on and you're out there, it turns into a wonderful experience. So it's always about making that decision, you know, and that's why, you know, some of the things you've mentioned, very practical tools like writing in the diary and knowing, oh, this particular day is a really busy day for me. So is there something restful I can do that evening? Or can I make the next day just a little slower? And that applies to the menstrual cycle. You know, I think it's essential for any woman that's interested in well-being, even if you have gone through the menstrual cycle and you're in that menopausal stage, there's still methods that you can use to work. You work with the moon cycle instead, and it's incredible what you will notice about yourself, the differences from that pre-ovulation phase, you know, the week after your period, and then the week before your period. You know, you feel like a completely different person. And again, often our instinct is, I'll just push through it, just keep pushing through it. But it's like, actually, but why? Why do that? Because your body just starts shouting louder at you. So the symptoms get worse. So there's that sense of going, oh, actually, but I can learn about myself here, and I can learn. I'm really tired in those days before my period. So I think those are the days I need to eat a little bit more, rest a bit more, not push myself too hard, because I know after my period that I actually might feel a bit more like, oh, yeah, I really feel like getting outdoors in the fresh air, and I really feel like having some more healthy food this week. And you'll notice that's happening in your body if you can just get your mind out of the way.
Yeah, and it's actually really, really, I mean, I find that so powerful, sort of getting to understand my menstrual cycle a bit better. Just only in the last couple of years, it's like, why did it take me until I was 40 to do this? But I now use that quite a lot in planning my work, in delegating to others in my family. And, you know, in those weeks, like, actually, you know what, I don't need to do, someone else can do the laundry and the cooking, actually. But I definitely, so I don't tend to do very much. I mean, anybody who follows me on social media might notice that I go quite quiet for a while every month, and and I just tend to not do that. And I went for a run. I went for a really lovely 4-mile run this morning, but that was the first time that I'd run for maybe a week and a half, because it was the first time that my body was ready to go and do that again. And listening and that kind of working with my cycle I found it so powerful. I found it a really useful tool, particularly as I'm in my mid-40s going through perimenopause. It gives me a lens into the changes and impact. But if I can stay connected, then it's really useful for me to work well. And I wonder as well about working postmenopausally, working with the lunar cycle, just allowing yourself that rest on a cyclical basis means that you're more able to access energy as well. Like, I mean, athletes training will they need to allow rest in their schedule or they'll injure themselves. So we're not so good at allowing ourselves to do that in our day-to-day life.
And I think the benefits to rest are huge, you know, as well as my book, I've noticed, you know, there's been a lot of books that have come out on this subject of rest. You know, mine, you know, it's coming from a yoga perspective. There's also been a lot of scientific books coming out on rest. And so, you know, we're constantly getting told of all the benefits of resting, but very rarely are we getting told why it's so hard for us to actually rest.
I read a book called Burnout by Emily and Amelie Nagoski, which was quite good, because they kind of explore how kind of a bit how the world is a bit geared against women, and in terms of, they talk quite a lot about the impacts of the patriarchy on the fact that women have to be all things to all people, and, you know, successful, pretty, slim, smart, you know, nice to everybody, compassionate to others, all of these things, but not now allowing enough space for that kind of rest. And how, and they talk about how it is almost a rest, and looking after yourself and avoiding burnout can actually be a bit of an act of resistance to the patriarchy, which I quite like. That kind of suited me as well.
Well, and I think it's really true, and we can even see that, you know, with you know, if we look all the way back to the time of industrialization, you know, which was a time when a lot of people stopped working the land and started working in factories. Now, I'm not casting judgment on whether that was good or bad, but we certainly know that happened. One of the impacts, of course, by people no longer working on the land, was that we were no longer in touch with the natural cycles of nature. So of course, if you work on the land, you're going to work really long days in the summer, you're going to work hard in the harvest, and then you have that winter kind of quieter time, because you've just got less light, so there's less that you can do. And of course, with things like industrialization, with things like electricity, you know, all of these things, of course, which have been, you know, incredible to our life, but they have disconnected us from that natural rhythm of the sun and the moon, you know, the moon, which is so crucial when you start to look at women's health and women's menstrual cycle. And so in a sense, even just those things that we don't think about, you know, I'm sitting here now looking at a screen which is shining light at me, and I've got a light on above me and a lamp on over there. You know, it's not really connecting me very much with this kind of end of winter, early spring sense of change that's happening outside of my window. So you know, this is why I think things like, you know, as well as the practices of yoga that I talk about, anything that gets you outdoors, you know, because even something like running, which obviously we can think is quite strenuous and quite hard, but if you're doing it because you genuinely want to, just to feel good in your body, and you're not doing it because of another reason for a goal that's somewhere in the future, it can actually be incredibly restful.
And that was my run today as well. That was exactly what my run was about today, was about that. I quite often do a gratitude run, so where I literally thank every part of my body as I'm running, because it's all involved in keeping me going. And then I start going on about, then I start move on to being grateful for the things that I can see around me, and then wider and wider. And I start a run like that, and it's a really wonderful way of kind of being in a really lovely, just in a lovely state of being. But also, it was very much not, there's a lovely run here that I can do that's 4 miles out and back. And it wasn't about speed or time or anything like that. That is my favorite kind of run. That's just what it's for. It's about enjoying it and that kind of thing. And that felt restful to me as well. I kind of needed to get a bit of cortisol out of my system as well. So it was really useful.
Because it's about becoming present, you know. So I think that idea of a gratitude run sounds really beautiful. And there is that sense of becoming more present with your body, more present with your surroundings, you know. And it really, that idea of bringing yourself into the moment is just reduces stress, because usually, even if you're in the middle of a catastrophe, usually you can respond to it in that moment. But what really depletes us is all the what if. And of course, we've been living in that globally now for this year. What if, with there being no answers, and with there being no real sense of what, you know, the final outcome, if there ever is a final outcome, you know, of what this situation's going to be. So again, if we can have this sense of tools to actually be like, okay, but today, what can I do for myself today? What do I need today? It actually brings a great sense of relief, because usually we can answer that question. You know, usually we can figure out, okay, what do I need today? And that's it, you know. But it's so tempting to, you know, most of us do, you know, we are planning a lot for the future, and that's been taken away from us, you know, which, you know, of course, it's, you know, we've just gone through February, which is often the time when you want to be planning holidays and things like that. It's not necessarily always a good thing to not be thinking about the future, but just as a kind of general rule of thumb, just to work with one day at a time, you know, it does bring you into the present moment.
Yeah, and that's so helpful, and that's kind of what rest is about as well, isn't it? That's how we can access rest, is by being present and mindful. So Mel, I hear your publishers have been very generous. Is that right? And allowed, said that I could share a discount on your book, which I do really recommend. I was getting I've been a little Mel Skinner kind of advocate here and there, showing them. I haven't got it because I'm not at home.
I've got so if you can see it. So that's what it looks like. Rest is Radical.
Very nice, calming book, like to look at.
And it's got pictures in it. See if I can find one. Yeah, so my publishers have given, so there's like one of the pictures of the postures. So it's very practical, you know, this isn't a really lofty, aspirational kind of book, and it does contain aspects of yoga philosophy, but very digestible. And you know, it's really about, you know, for busy people with busy lives, how can you just, you know, bring rest into it. So if anyone wants to buy a copy, you can go through my website, which is melskinneryoga.com, and you'll see at the top it says Rest is Radical. So you just click on that, and then there'll be a button to say buy now. And if you click on that, it will take you to the publisher's site, and the discount code is RR20. So capital R, capital R20, and that will give 20% off up until the 14th of April.
Okay.
You can get hardback and you can get it ebook as well.
Well, that's brilliant, absolutely amazing, and I do recommend it. And it really is digestible. So I love yoga, but it's not a practice that I've ever managed to like. There's just so many things that I love that is part of a regular part of what I do. But I found it very digestible. I don't know a great deal about yoga philosophy, although what I do know, I totally get, you know, feels right up my street. But I really enjoyed it and highly recommend it. And it just helps to underline the benefits of rest and thinking about it as almost thinking about it not just about me, but about the wider world, and then coming back into how important it is for me in order to be able to thrive. So I found it really powerful. So thank you very much for that. I think we probably need to wrap up, but it's been you and I could talk all day. But thank you so much for sharing your wisdom. And if we were going to go off and find our 5 minutes of rest before we go to bed this evening, what would be your recommendation, do you think?
So I think for 5 minutes of rest before bed, put your legs up against the wall. So you just lie on your back and you put your legs straight up the wall. If that's tricky for you because your backs of your legs are particularly tight, say, for example, because you do a lot of running, you can just bend them and put them on the back of a chair seat. Prop something over your eyes, an eye pillow. If you don't have an eye pillow, put a scarf over your eyes. Set a timer for 10 minutes and just lie there and breathe. And just let your mind do its thing. Treat it as a meditation, but lying in that position is very quietening for your mind. Putting your feet above your head basically is what you're trying to do.
I love it. Thank you very much. It's a great recommendation. Thank you so much. Thank you very much to all of those of you listening. Let us know if you've got any questions, and I will see you again. I can't remember who's coming next. Somebody else is coming at some point in the future. I'll work that out. Bye all. Thank you so much, Mel.
Bye.
Bye.